to hear how Mace Windu's early story shapes the Jedi he later becomes. And there's one moment from his youngling years that completely changes how you look at the purple blade later. Haruun Kal and the first sign something was different. Mace Windu was born in 72 BBY on the planet Haruun Kal. Haruun Kal wasn't some peaceful core world. It was harsh, tribal, dangerous. He was born into one of the most powerful families of his tribe, which already put expectation around him before he could even understand what that meant. Like most toddlers there, he received an inoculation that left a small scar on his body. That was just part of life on Haruun Kal. Survival came first. As an infant, he took a liking to lush fruit, the violet-coloured fruit native to his world. That colour stuck with him subconsciously, but the real turning point comes just 1 year after his birth. The tree, the Garu-Bears, and the Khan. When Mace was about a year old, his parents were ambushed by Garu-Bears. His mother, trying to save him, placed him in a high tree before she and his father were killed in the fight. And this is where things get unsettling. When other warriors found him, he wasn't crying, he wasn't in shock, he wasn't grieving, he was calm. The tribe didn't understand it, but what had happened was that Mace had unintentionally tapped into the Force. Instead of emotional trauma overwhelming him, the Force steadied him, it regulated him, it kept him centered in a moment that should have shattered a child. That lack of grief was strange enough that when a Jedi later visited the tribe and heard about both the brutal deaths and the boy's unusual reaction, the possibility of Force sensitivity became clear. Now here's where the culture of Haruun Kal comes into play. Before sending him away, the tribe performed an ancient choosing ritual. In front of him were 3 objects: a lush fruit, a puzzle pyramid, and the shell of a lightsaber. He chose the lightsaber shell, and that decision, even at that early age, set the course for his entire life. Sent to the Jedi Order. With his tribe's support, Mace was sent to the Jedi Order, the monastic guardians of peace and justice in the Galactic Republic. And right away, there's something important here. He later came to believe that he had been abandoned by his parents, which is interesting because we know they died protecting him. But as a child taken from his world and sent to Coruscant, that perception of abandonment still formed in him. Now think about that for a second. A child who subconsciously suppressed grief through the Force. A child who lost his parents violently. A child who comes to believe he was abandoned. That emotional foundation is there long before he ever sits on the Jedi Council. As a youngling, he was taught the central Jedi lesson: let go, trust in the Force, release attachment. And apparently, he never quite responded well to Grandmaster Yoda's sense of humour either, which is such a small detail, but tells you something about his temperament. Even as a child, he seemed serious, focused, not easily amused. And then we get to the part that really defines him. If you are enjoying this Star Wars deep dive, it's practically all we do here, so you might want to stick around. I'm never going to be able to build my lightsaber. As a youngling, Mace obtained an amethyst-coloured kyber crystal. Again, that purple tone shows up. It's consistent in his life. He sets out to build his lightsaber, and he fails, and not just once. He struggles with it enough that he begins to doubt whether he'll pass this rite of Jedi training at all. We tend to think of Mace Windu as composed, disciplined, immovable, but here he is as a youngling, saying I'm never going to be able to build my lightsaber. That is frustration, that is impatience, and that is doubt. Professor Huyang, the ancient droid instructor responsible for lightsaber construction, observes him and reaches a conclusion that's incredibly telling. The problem isn't mechanical skill, it isn't intelligence. It's that Mace doesn't have the patience yet, and he doesn't truly understand what the process requires. Huyang tells him something that sounds simple, but completely reframes the exercise. The secret is that the pieces never needed to be built. Lightsaber construction isn't about assembling parts the way you would build a machine. It's about alignment, harmony, understanding how the components already fit together through the Force. Mace was approaching it practically. He needed to approach it spiritually. Early skill and a first victory. One of Mace's instructors was Tira Sa, and at some point during his training, he managed to best her in a sparring session. She was surprised, but she respected his skill, and that became a fond memory for him. So alongside the impatience and doubt, there was also natural ability, precision, and control. He also formed a lasting friendship with Sora Bulk, another Jedi who would remain significant in his life. Sora helped him to refine Vapad, but later fell to the dark side and became an agent of Count Dooku before being defeated by Quinlan Vos. These were formative relationships that shaped his understanding of the Order, and this is where things start to click into place. When you line all of this up, the calm during trauma, the suppression of grief, the early struggle with patience, the insistence on building rather than aligning, you start to see a pattern. Mace Windu's life with the Force began as a mechanism for control. It steadied him when he was 1 year old watching his parents die. It became the tool which he mastered discipline. It was something he learned to regulate carefully. So when he later teaches younglings to let go, when he emphasizes detachment, when he becomes one of the most controlled Jedi on the Council, that isn't random development, it's consistency. The boy in the tree who didn't cry becomes the man who refuses to bend. When we see him later in the Clone Wars era as a master who demands control and restraint, we're seeing the final product of lessons he learned very early. The Mace and Anakin paradox. These facts changed the Mace and Anakin dynamic for me. Mace Windu was an impatient youngling who struggled with control. He doubted himself while building his lightsaber. He approached it practically instead of spiritually. Professor Hu Yang had to tell him that the pieces never needed to be built. They needed to be understood. Now fast forward years later to when Anakin Skywalker enters the Order. Anakin is also practical. He builds things. He constructed his own pod racer. He built C-3PO. He understands machines instinctively. His instinct is always to assemble, fix, construct. And that's exactly how young Mace approached his own rite of passage. So when Mace looks at Anakin and sees someone who doesn't fully trust the mythical side of the Force yet, someone who relies on ability, skill, and raw talent, he's looking at a version of himself before Professor Hu Yang corrected his understanding. And yet, he shows Anakin almost no visible patience. That's the contradiction. Because Mace also believed as a child that he had been abandoned, that emotional wound was part of his foundation. Anakin, of course, was separated from his mother and carried that attachment openly and painfully. Both of them were defined by early loss. The difference is how they processed it. When Mace watched his parents die, he unintentionally tapped into the Force and became unnaturally calm. The tribe found it odd. There was no outward grief. The Force regulated him. Anakin, on the other hand, feels everything intensely and visibly. So you have two Force-sensitive children, shaped by trauma. One who internalized and controlled it immediately, and one who struggled to contain it at all. And here's where it gets even more layered. As a youngling, Mace was taught to let go and trust the Force. He had to learn patience the hard way. He had to temper emotion. He had to align himself rather than force outcomes. He eventually mastered that lesson so completely that discipline became his identity. So when he encounters Anakin, who resists letting him go, who questions authority, who operates from instinct and attachment, Mace doesn't see himself. He sees a failure to learn the lesson he fought to master. From Mace's perspective, control is survival. Control is stability. Control is what kept him centered in the worst moment of his life. From Anakin's perspective, emotion is connection, attachment is love, action is agency. Mace had once struggled with impatience, but overcame it by doubling down on discipline. Anakin struggles with impatience and resists that same correction. So instead of empathy, there's rigidity. Mace's lack of reaction to his parents' death was considered strange even by his own tribe. It wasn't normal. It wasn't typical child behaviour. It was the Force stepping in to regulate him before he could even process grief naturally. And we know the Jedi philosophy emphasises letting go. So you have to wonder, was that early suppression ever truly addressed? or was it simply reinforced? Because if that lesson he was taught was let go, and he already had instinctively done that in the most traumatic moment imaginable, then discipline wouldn't feel optional to him. It would feel correct, necessary. So when Anakin struggles to let go, when he questions, when he holds on tightly to attachments, Mace may not see someone who needs compassion. He may see someone refusing the very principle that saved him. It becomes less about personal dislike and more about two completely different survival responses to trauma. One regulated through the Force immediately, one overwhelmed by it. This should have pulled Mace toward Anakin. He should have been a mentor to him and taught him everything he learned about controlling emotion through the years. But instead, he dislikes Anakin. Final thoughts. The more you look at Mace Windu's youngling years, the more you realise that his story didn't start in battle. It started when he watched his parents die in front of him. And honestly, that makes his story a lot more interesting. Let me know in the comments. Does this change how you see Mace Windu? And do you think he should have been more close with Anakin? If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and let's uncover the galaxy's greatest secrets together. Thanks for watching.